guys. Grab a horn. It's almost time.
Hey, guys, get ready. Say goodbye to the old and welcome in the new.
Here we go.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Hold it.
Actually worked. Gotta love television. New Year's Eve, a time when everyone's eyes are glued to the clock. But did you ever wonder why the hands of a clock go clockwise? I mean, why not the other way around?
When you stop to think about it, our lives are governed by the clock. Appointments, travel, parking, work schedules,
and television segments. In fact, I only have a few minutes to explain this.
Actually, 6 minutes and 53 seconds.
6 minutes 53, that's not a lot of time to talk about time. Anyway, so why do the hands of a clock move clockwise? Well, to answer that, we need to turn back the hands of time. More than 5,000 years.
would have to pick the winter to come back. Way back around 3000 BC or so, the main method for keeping track of time was what I'm standing on right now. The Earth, and the fact that it constantly rotates. It's the rotation of the Earth that makes the sun seem to rise, move across the sky, and then set. Now, it's this movement of the sun through the sky that led to what's believed to be the first time-measuring instrument, a stick. Well, actually, you put the stick into the rotating Earth, and now you have what's believed to be the first time-measuring instrument, the shadow clock, or sundial. Here's how it works. Now, to make this work, I need a sun. The sun. Yeah. Now, as the sun rises, begins to move through the sky, so does the shadow that it casts through the stick. Now, what this shadow tells you is basically how much daylight you have left. A handy piece of information if you have to find shelter for the night. But what does all this have to do with clocks going clockwise? Well, it all depends on what hemisphere you're in. Let's take our sundial and put it in the southern hemisphere. Now, as the Earth rotates, notice the direction the shadow's moving. Oh, gee. Now let's take our sundial and put it in the northern hemisphere. Now notice the direction of the shadow. Well, it just so happens that the mechanical clocks we know today were invented in the northern hemisphere. Their hands mimicking the movement of the sundial in the northern hemisphere. A direction we know today as clockwise.
Clockwise, schmockwise. Come back and unfreeze us.
Relax, I only have 5 minutes left. Now, where was I? The sundial was used in many societies to keep time. By the 8th century BC, sundials were divided into units, representing the hours of the day. And as a timekeeper, it was pretty reliable.
That is, until the sun went down or the sky turned overcast. Then you couldn't read the sundial. Bit of a problem. See, we quickly realized that we needed a timepiece that was as regular as the Earth-Sun clock, but that could be read anywhere at any time of the day or night. One of our first attempts was the water clock. It kept track of time by measuring the rate at which water leaked out of a pot through a hole at the bottom. Fairly decent method, unless you lived in a cold climate. Then time seemed to, well, stand still. Then there was the sand clock. It got around the freezing problem, but you could only measure short intervals of time, up to 60 minutes. Imagine the size of the sand clock you'd need to measure the length of a day. Hate to be the guy that has to turn that thing over when it's done. By the 14th century, water and sand were replaced by wheels, gears, and springs. These were the first mechanical clocks. They were a little more practical, but they too had their flaws.
Because of the different materials used to make them, no two clocks kept the same time. And that's what it's all about. Consistency.
You see, to have an accurate timepiece, you need three things. The first is something with a regular and constant cycle. Now, the search for such a thing proved difficult until they discovered this. Sorry. No, not the yo-yo. The pendulum.
Each time the pendulum swings, it advances the hands of the clock. But how can this be accurate? Doesn't it eventually slow down? Well, yes, but take a closer look. You see, the slower the pendulum goes, the less distance it has to travel, so that the time it takes to complete one swing remains the same.
But eventually the pendulum's going to stop. Which brings me to the second thing you need for your accurate timepiece. That is a power source to keep the pendulum going.
But electricity wasn't around back then, so they turned to something that's been around since day one. Gravity. Gravity pulled weights down, and with the help of wheels and springs, the clocks ticked away.
The final thing you need for your timepiece is some kind of display to show you how many cycles have gone by. And there you have it. A clock. Is that the correct time? Gotta get going.
But the pendulum clock wasn't perfect. You see, friction between the many moving parts made the pendulum clock imprecise. So at the end of a day, the clock might be out by half a second. Now, that may not sound like much. Being a few seconds late for an appointment is no big deal. But when a mere tenth of a second can make the difference between a gold or silver medal, you need something a little more accurate.
Which brings me back here to 5000 BC in the bitter cold, to where our ancestors discovered the first clock, the Earth-Sun clock. But why here? Well, sitting beside the first primitive sundial was another regular cycle we later discovered could be used to keep time. A rock.
Actually, it's what's inside the rock, a mineral called quartz.
Now, you're probably wondering, how does a hunk of quartz keep time? Well, an interesting thing happens to quartz crystal when you apply electricity to it. It vibrates with a constant frequency. These regular vibrations are used to keep time. In fact, it works very much like a pendulum, except a quartz clock is 10 times more accurate than a pendulum clock. Now, there's one more thing you need to know about time to really...
5,
No, wait.
4,
You see, when the planets are aligned, there's a... No, wait! I need more time!
Hey, we haven't cornered the market on interesting questions.